All right, y'all. The breakdown of the book of Revelations, chapter 18. I cannot believe we've made it this far. Okay, so what does Revelation 18 mean? The prior chapter used Babylon as a reference to a religious or spiritual corruption. This religious Babylon was tolerated and manipulated by the leaders of the world for a time before then destroyed. Revelation 17. In John's vision, the leaders of the world seem unfazed by the destruction of this spiritual Babylon. This fall was most likely completed by midpoint of the tribulation when the Antichrist and the false prophet fully engage in blasphemy and idolatry. Revelation 13. In chapter 18, John's vision shifts to describe the fall of a slightly different Babylon. In this context, Babylon is a political and economic entity. It is probably also a literal city, perhaps not with that exact name during the end times. It's common for a capital city to stand in as a reference to a culture or a government or even a religion. Babylon is, Babylon in this chapter occupies a place somewhere in that range of meanings. The fall described are most likely to occur near the end of the tribulation, probably as a result of the horrific bowl judgments described in chapter 16. An angel proclaims the destruction of Babylon, specifically making mention of her pervasive wickedness, as in the other scriptures, sexual immorality seems to have a double meaning here. The Bible often uses sexual sin as a metaphor for idolatry and other forms of false religion. The city, the city nation of Babylon in the end times is not only a hub of commerce and powers, but of sin and sensuality as well. Revelation 18, 1 to 3. John hears another voice warning my people to flee the city. This parallels the Old Testament warning to evacuate Sodom in advance of God's judgment. Genesis 19, 12 through 13. Not only does God want his people to avoid being caught up in the sins of Babylon, he warns them that tangible judgment is coming and they need to flee. The sins of Babylon are enormous, and her judgment from God will be in a proper proportion to that sin. The rapid nature of this judgment is first mentioned here, then further noted in later verses, and that's Revelations 18, 4 through 8. In the prior chapter, a religious Babylon was said to have fallen, but there was no notable mourning from the leaders of the world. Here, however, the fall of Babylon as an economy is met with grief. World leaders will see, probably both literally and figuratively, the smoke from her destruction and stray far away in hopes of avoiding the same fate. Once again, the fact that this destruction was swift is a key point of John's vision. Revelations 18, 9 through 10. Along with political leaders, economic leaders will grieve the fall of Babylon. This passage lists many of the most precious commodities of the ancient world. The point is not to give a literal inventory of Babylon, but to symbolize her far reaching and enormous wealth. At some point in the end times, Babylon will go from being outrageously wealthy and powerful to desolate faster than anyone would have ever thought possible. Revelations 18, 11 through 20. John also sees an angel throwing a great millstone into the sea. Millstones in that era were made of tough rocks such as basalt. A common millstone might be 18 inches 45 centimeters around and 4 inches 10 centimeters thick, weighing upwards of 100 pounds or 45 kilograms. What's described here is a great millstone, meaning one of significant size. Some millstones were so large they had to be worked by livestock and could weigh thousands of pounds slash kilograms. The imagery of a massive boulder being dropped into the oceans parallel the complete and speedy destruction of Babylon. Ooh, when she falls, all her activities will cease entirely, avenging the persecution and murderer of God's people. Revelations 18:21 through 24. So chapters 17 and 18 depicts consequences of the tribulation, which seems to have happened parallel to the various seals, trumpets, and bowl judgments. Chapter 19 will resume describing a timeline including the end of the tribulation and the earthly return of Jesus Christ. All right, now, show chapter context. Revelations 1 through 8 contains a glorious angel's pronouncement of doom of Babylon. This Babylon here appears to be a literal physical city, whereas Babylon described in chapter 17 is a corrupt religious system. The Babylon of chapter 17 was associated with the political system, but was not the political power. The Babylon of chapter 18 is a center of a demonic political, commercial, and economic system. The fall of Babylon parallels what happened to the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, Genesis 19:1 through 29. Religious Babylon falls in the middle of the tribulation to the delight of kings. Commercial Babylon falls at the end of the tribulation and kings lament her fall. All right, so part 2. Revelation 18 focuses on the symbolic fall of Babylon, representing a powerful and corrupt and commercial empire. It depicts the destruction of this entity, emphasizing its immorality, materialism, and influence over other nations. The chapter also highlights the consequences of Babylon's actions, including the mourning of world leaders and merchants who profited from its system. Ultimately, Revelation 18 portrays God's judgment upon Babylon and calls for his people to separate themselves from its corrupting influence. So, the breakdown symbolic meaning Babylon in Revelation 18 is not a literal city, but a symbol for a powerful, corrupt, and materialistic system that opposes God. Some interpretations link it to Rome in John's time, while others see it as a representation of the end time evil and the devil's work. Fall of Babylon. This chapter describes Babylon's fall as sudden and complete, symbolized by an angel throwing a millstone into the sea. It signifies in the irreversible devastating nature of its destruction. Girl, slow down. Mourning and lamentation. The world leaders and merchants who benefited from Babylon's system mourns its fall, highlighting the global impact of its demise. Their limitations reveal their dependence on Babylon's economic and political power. Call to separation. An angel calls for God's people to separate themselves from Babylon and its sins, emphasizing the need to avoid participating in its corrupt practices. This highlights the importance of discerning between God's way and the world's way. Divine judgment. Revelation 18 emphasizes that Babylon's destruction is an act of God's judgment for its wickedness and influence on other nations. The chapter serves as a warning against idolatry, materialism, and the pursuit of worldly power. Themes of hope. Despite this depiction of Babylon's fall, the chapter also carries themes of hope and vindication for God's people who are called to separate themselves from the corrupt system and await God's ultimate victory. All right, now, I can tell you it's getting better and better. Better and better. I'll see you tomorrow for chapter 19 breakdown. Bye, guys.